Hey guys, tonight we're going to step into the quietest, deepest museum of all. The Museum of Life itself, to look for a ghost. Imagine, we are 7 million years in the past, standing in a dense African forest that no human has ever seen. The air is thick, humid, and alive with the sounds of insects and birds you wouldn't recognize. Before you lies a world bathed in a green, filtered light, a world of immense trees and shadows that move with a life of their own. But in that sea of green, you spot a pair of eyes looking back. They belong to a creature that is neither ape nor human, but something that carries the seed of both within it. This creature is our shared ancestor, a ghost in the fossil record, living a life of foraging, climbing, and surviving, utterly unaware of the two astonishingly different futures that will one day spring from its lineage. Over millions of years, its descendants will be split apart by a changing climate. One line will remain with the trees, honing their bodies for a life of power and agility in the canopy. The other will step out into the sun, onto the open plains, their bodies remade by the challenges of a new and dangerous world. So how did that one single starting point lead to such profoundly different destinations? Why did one path lead to the silent, intelligent chimpanzees of today, while the other led to us, to cities, to language, to wondering about the stars? And if our stories began together, why aren't they still following in our footsteps? Thanks to a key that can unlock the past, a blend of ancient bones and modern genetics, tonight we will venture into that deep history together to find the answers. Frankly, if you were dropped into that Miocene forest without a guide, you'd probably be eaten by something you couldn't even name before you had time to complain about the humidity. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm. That long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. It always fascinates me to see where you're all tuning in from. Let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with a question that feels so natural, so perfectly logical, that it seems to demand a simple answer. When you look into the eyes of a chimpanzee, our closest living relative, you can feel an echo of yourself looking back. You see their hands, so much like your own, and their complex social lives, full of politics, friendships, and family bonds. Knowing how deeply we are connected, it feels almost inevitable to ask, if we evolved, why aren't they still evolving in the same way? Why aren't they slowly becoming human, too? The thought is compelling because it rests on an image planted so deep in our collective consciousness that we barely even notice it's there. You know the one. It's on posters, in textbooks, in museum gift shops. A line of figures marching from left to right. It starts with a stooped, ape-like creature, followed by a slightly taller, shaggier being, then another, and another, each one standing a little straighter, their brow a little less pronounced, until at the very end of the line stands a modern human. Upright and confident, the clear destination of the long journey. This iconic illustration, originally titled The Road to Homo sapiens, was created in 1965 by the artist Rudolf Zallinger for a Time Life book. It was meant to be a simple visual aid, but its power went far beyond that. It became the default mental picture for evolution itself. a straight line, a ladder of progress, a march toward a final, perfect goal. Us. It's a flattering story. It suggests that all of nature was working toward our arrival, that we are the pinnacle, the finished product. The problem is, it's completely wrong. The artist himself was reportedly quite unhappy with how his work was popularized, knowing that this simple, linear depiction wasn't a true reflection of the messy, branching reality of the fossil record. And that's the key. The evidence we have doesn't show a single, orderly line of ancestors. Instead, it reveals a chaotic scramble of different hominin species, many of which existed at the same time. There were side branches, evolutionary experiments that lasted for 1 million years before fizzling out, like the robust and powerful Sahelanthropus, who lived alongside our direct ancestors but don't fit anywhere in that neat little line. The march of progress is a myth, a powerful one, but a myth nonetheless. This image has planted a deep misconception that evolution has a direction, a purpose, and that some animals are more evolved than others. It reduces chimpanzees to a past version of ourselves, a stop along the way rather than what they truly are, our contemporaries, our cousins, a fellow success story living in the present day. Historians of science still argue whether the popular image did more to spark public interest in evolution or to cement a deep-seated misunderstanding of it. But to truly answer our question, we have to let go of it completely. We have to mentally burn the poster, shatter the ladder, and stop the march. Only then can we replace it with a shape that is far more accurate and infinitely more interesting, a vast and sprawling tree. Imagine that tree now, in the quiet of your mind. Its roots dig down into the very dawn of life, into the warm, chemical broth of a young Earth almost 4 billion years ago. The trunk represents that first, simple life, and as it grows upward through the immense darkness of deep time, it begins to branch. The first major branches are the great domains of life: bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. And one of those branches, the eukaryotic one, continues to grow and split again and again, creating the vast kingdoms of fungi, plants, and animals. Each split, each new fork in the wood, represents a moment of divergence, a point where one group of living things was separated from another and set upon a new course. The animal branch explodes into a fractal of smaller and smaller limbs: insects, fish, amphibians, reptiles, and finally, mammals. And on one of those mammalian branches, a smaller twig sprouts, the one we call primates. This twig continues to split, giving rise to lemurs, monkeys, and the great apes. And then, at the very, very tip of one of these tiny, insignificant-looking stems, you find us. And right next to us, on a twig that forked away from ours only a moment ago in geological time, you find the chimpanzees. This branching process, called speciation, is the engine of life's diversity. It isn't a magical event. It's usually a slow, mundane, and accidental process. Imagine a single, wide, meandering river full of fish. For thousands of years, all the fish swim together, sharing the same water, the same food, the same genes. But one year, a long drought lowers the water level, and a ridge of rock that was once deep underwater is now exposed, splitting the river into 2 separate streams. The fish are now divided into 2 populations. They can no longer meet or mate. The world in the left stream might be a little shadier, with more weeds to hide in, favoring fish with darker, greener scales. The right stream might be faster flowing, favoring fish with stronger, sleeker bodies. Over thousands of generations, tiny random changes in each population are favored by these different conditions. The fish in the left stream become, on average, a little greener. The fish in the right stream become, on average, a little stronger. After 100,000 years, another geological shift might remove the rocky barrier and reconnect the streams. But when the two groups of fish meet again, they no longer recognize each other as mates. Their genetics, their behaviors, their very bodies have drifted so far apart that they have become two distinct species. This is how the tree of life grows, not by climbing, but by splitting. And on that tree, there are no higher or lower branches. Every living twig, every species alive today, is a modern species. We are all the current cutting-edge models of survival, each sculpted by an unbroken chain of successful ancestors stretching back billions of years. A cockroach scuttling across the floor is not a primitive creature. It's an evolutionary marvel, a master of survival whose design has been successfully tested against countless extinctions. A shark is not less evolved than a dolphin. It's a perfectly crafted predator whose lineage is far older than our own. We have a tendency to see intelligence like our own as the ultimate goal, but nature shows us that's just a bias. One of the clearest proofs of this is a fascinating phenomenon known as convergent evolution, where completely unrelated species facing similar problems independently arrive at similar solutions. The wings of a bat, a mammal, the wings of a bird, a reptile descendant, and the wings of a dragonfly, an insect, all serve the same function, but they evolved from entirely different starting points. It's a beautiful demonstration that there is no single, predetermined path to success. There are countless paths, and each is valid. Even the formal system we use to classify life, first established by the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus in the 18th century, reflects this branching reality. It was Linnaeus, working long before Darwin, who first had the scientific courage to classify humans not as separate from nature, but as part of it, placing Homo sapiens in the primate order right alongside apes. He saw the physical connections, the branching pattern, without even knowing the evolutionary reason for it. We can even see speciation happening in the world today. Biologists study ring species, like the Ensatina salamanders that live in a ring around California's Central Valley. As the salamanders spread south down each side of the valley, they slowly changed. By the time they met again at the southern end, the populations had diverged so much they could no longer interbreed. They are a living, breathing example of a river of life splitting in two right before our eyes. And so, the question of what makes a species is not as simple as it sounds. Biologists still debate the precise definition of a species, a surprisingly tricky concept known as the species problem. But the core idea remains: life branches. And on that sprawling, chaotic, and beautiful tree, we are not the star on top. We are just one leaf among millions, shimmering in the sun next to our cousin, the chimpanzee. So we stand beside our cousins on these two neighboring twigs of the great tree. The visual metaphor is comforting, but it's the microscopic biological reality that is truly staggering. For a long time, the closeness was just a matter of observation. You could look at the skeleton of a chimpanzee and the skeleton of a human and see the unmistakable similarities in the bones, the teeth, the overall body plan. But you couldn't quantify it. You couldn't put a precise number on that kinship. That all changed at the dawn of the 21st century. Thanks to one of the most ambitious scientific undertakings in history, the Human Genome Project, which was completed in 2003, we were finally able to read our own genetic blueprint, all 3 billion letters of it, and soon after, we sequenced the genome of the chimpanzee. For the first time, we could lay the 2 instruction manuals for our species side by side and compare them, letter for letter. The result was a revelation that still echoes with profound implications. The 2 codes were 98.8% identical. Let that number sink in for a moment. If you were to print out the entire genetic sequence of a human and a chimp, they would read like 2 copies of the same immense encyclopedia, with just a few random typos and rearranged sentences in one of them. Out of every 1,000 letters, only about 12 are different. The rest is the same. The genes for building a heart, a lung, a liver. The genes for metabolizing sugar, for fighting infection, for creating neurons. The vast, vast majority of the fundamental machinery of life is held in common. This is the ultimate proof of our shared ancestry. It is a biological echo of that ghost in the Miocene forest we imagined earlier. It also allows us to finally clarify our relationship. We did not descend from chimpanzees. Saying that would be like saying you descended from your cousin. You don't. You both descend from your shared grandparents. Chimpanzees are our cousins. They have been on their own evolutionary journey for just as long as we have, ever since our ancestral lines split apart. It's a quirky and often surprising fact of genetics that chimpanzees and their close relatives, the bonobos, are more closely related to us humans than they are to the other great apes, like gorillas. This shared library of DNA is what allows scientists to create a kind of evolutionary timepiece. It's a beautifully simple concept called the molecular clock. The idea is that genetic mutations, the tiny typos that happen when DNA is copied, occur at a roughly predictable average rate over the millennia. So, if you know that rate, you can compare the DNA of 2 different species, count up the number of differences, and calculate how long it must have been since they shared a common ancestor. It's like looking at 2 versions of an ancient text that were copied by hand. By counting the number of scribal errors, you can estimate how many times the text has been recopied, and thus how old it is. When scientists applied this molecular clock to the human and chimpanzee genomes, the hands of time pointed back to a moment between 5 and 7 million years ago. Geneticists still debate the exact mutation rate for the molecular clock, which is why estimates for the human-chimp split can vary by 1 million years or more, but they all point to that same deep window in the past. But this stunning genetic closeness also presents us with our central mystery. If we are so alike on the inside, in our very code, why is the expression of that code so vastly different on the outside? That 1.2% difference seems impossibly small to account for the chasm that separates us. How can a handful of genetic typos and edits separate a world of termite fishing from a world of space exploration? How can it separate a society built on grooming from one built on global finance? What incredible secrets are hidden in that tiny fraction of our genome? The rest of our journey tonight is dedicated to exploring that 1.2% gap. We will travel down the corridors of deep time and look for the moments when small changes in that code began to ripple outward, creating the cascade of differences in body, mind, and culture that eventually forged the 2 very different but equally successful beings we see today. The story is not one of good versus bad, or better versus worse. It is the story of how a tiny genetic whisper can, over millions of years, grow into a roar of change, To find the origin of that 1.2% difference, we have to travel back across that vast ocean of time, back to the world before the split. We must journey to an Africa that would be almost unrecognizable to us now. This is the late Miocene epoch, a time geologists call the Age of Apes. It's a fitting name, because during this period, a spectacular diversity of ape species flourished not just in Africa, but across much of the Old World. While today there are only a handful of great ape species left, clinging to survival, the world of 7 million years ago was their kingdom. Fossils from Miocene apes have been found as far afield as Spain and Hungary, a testament to how successful and widespread they once were before the planet's climate began to cool and dry, pushing them back into their tropical strongholds. Here, in the heart of Africa, the world is green and wet. The great savannas that we so closely associate with human origins have not yet fully formed. Instead, scientific analysis of fossilized pollen and ancient soil layers from this period reveals a landscape that was a lush mosaic of dense tropical forests, sprawling woodlands, and gallery forests lining the banks of wide, slow-moving rivers. Let's step into that world now. The day for our last common ancestor begins as the first pale light filters through the thick canopy above. You awaken not on the ground, but in a nest of woven branches and leaves, high up in the relative safety of the trees. The air is cool and damp with morning mist. The first order of business, as it always is food. You move through the branches with a practiced ease, your body a master of this vertical world. Your long arms and powerful hands grip the limbs, while your feet are flexible enough to grasp them too. You might spend the morning foraging for ripe figs, your memory a rich map of which trees are fruiting this time of year. Your diet is broad. Fruits are the prize, but you also eat young leaves, blossoms, and perhaps you use a stick to probe into a fallen log for insects, or raid a bird's nest for its eggs. Your senses are tuned to this forest world. Your eyes, sharp and forward-facing, judge the distance for a leap. Your ears pick up the warning call of a monkey, signaling a predator nearby. Your nose helps you find the sweetest, ripest fruit. You live in a small, close-knit group. Social life is everything. It is your shield against danger and your key to survival. You spend hours grooming with a close ally, your fingers carefully picking through their fur. This act is not just about hygiene. It is the currency of trust, a quiet ritual that strengthens the political bonds holding your group together. A moment later, you might be part of a loud, boisterous display, with the males of your group hooting and drumming on the resonant roots of a giant tree. A show of force to warn off any neighboring groups who might be encroaching on your territory. Danger is a constant presence. Down on the forest floor, predators like the ancestors of leopards and giant hyenas are always a threat. An eagle with a massive wingspan might snatch an unwary youngster from the canopy. Survival depends on vigilance, on the strength of your group, and on your intimate knowledge of this green world. As you move through this life, you are neither chimp nor human. You are something else entirely. A species with its own unique blend of traits, perfectly suited to this specific time and place. Paleontologists still argue whether this ancestor was primarily a knuckle walker, like a modern chimp when it came to the ground, or if it had a more flexible way of moving, perhaps walking on its palms. Its brain is the size of a modern chimpanzee's, but it holds within its wiring the potential for two very different futures. This creature is the living, breathing starting point, the shared grandparent whose legacy will be divided and reshaped by the immense pressures of a changing planet. For now, its world is stable. But the climate is beginning to shift in subtle ways. The air is becoming a little drier each century, the rains a little less reliable. The world that has sustained this age of apes is on the brink of a transformation, one that will present the descendants of this forest dweller with a choice, a fork in the evolutionary road from which there will be no turning back. That ancient forested world is now gone, buried under millions of years of rock and dust. And the creatures who lived in it, our shared ancestors, are gone too. Finding any trace of them is a task of almost impossible difficulty. The journey from a living being to a fossil is a lottery against Oblivion with infinitesimally small odds of winning. For an animal to become a fossil, its remains have to be buried rapidly in the right kind of sediment, safe from scavengers, decay, and the crushing forces of the earth. Forest environments, with their acidic soils and damp biological activity, are notoriously bad at preserving bones. They prefer to recycle them. This is why the fossil record for chimpanzee and gorilla ancestors is almost completely blank. Their forest homes simply consumed their dead. For our own lineage, we owe a great debt to geology. The formation of the Great Rift Valley in East Africa, a massive tear in the Earth's crust, has acted as a giant conveyor belt for fossils. The constant tectonic activity and erosion in this region continually expose ancient layers of rock, bringing the bones of our long-lost relatives to the surface, where they can be found by the patient eyes of paleoanthropologists. Even so, what we find are not complete skeletons, but ghosts. A piece of a jaw, a handful of teeth, a fragment of a limb. From these whispers of bone, we must reconstruct a life. One of the most haunting and important of these ghosts is known as Sahelanthropus chadensis. Discovered not in the Rift Valley, but thousands of kilometers to the west in the deserts of Chad, its discovery radically expanded the map of where our earliest relatives might have lived. Nicknamed Tumai, meaning hope of life in the local language, the find consists of a nearly complete, though crushed, cranium. At roughly 7 million years old, it sits right at the estimated time of the human-chimpanzee split. In many ways, Tomai looks like an ape. Its brain was no bigger than a modern chimp's, and it had a heavy brow ridge. But it holds one tantalizing clue that sends a shiver down the spine of anyone who studies human origins. The clue is a small hole at the base of the skull called the foramen magnum. This is where the spinal cord connects to the brain. In an ape that walks on all fours, like a chimpanzee, this hole is positioned towards the back of the skull to accommodate a forward-leaning posture. In a human who walks upright, the hole is positioned directly underneath the skull, allowing the head to balance on top of a vertical spine. Tomai's foramen magnum is positioned forward, not fully underneath like ours, but significantly further forward than a chimp's. This is powerful anatomical evidence that its head was balanced atop a more upright spine, that it may have been beginning to walk on 2 legs. This single fossil, ancient and distorted as it is, blurs the line. Is it an ape? Is it human? A fierce debate continues over whether Sahelanthropus is a true hominin on our branch of the tree, an ancestor of chimps, or a member of an entirely separate, extinct ape lineage. We simply don't have enough of its skeleton to be sure. Another ghost from this same shadowy period is Orrorin Ardipithecus, nicknamed Millennium Man, whose fragmented remains were found in Kenya. What we have of Orrorin tells a similarly complex story. The shape of its femur, the thick thigh bone, strongly suggests it could support its weight on 2 legs when on the ground. Yet its arm and finger bones are long and curved, clear adaptations for a life spent climbing powerfully through the trees. These fossils, and others like them, teach us the most important lesson about this early period of our evolution. It was a mosaic. The traits that we think of as human did not appear all at once in a neat package. Our earliest ancestors were not failed apes or half-formed humans. They were successful transitional creatures, patchworks of old and new. They had bodies adapted for two worlds, one in the trees and one on the ground. They might have climbed to feed and sleep, but walked upright to travel between patches of woodland. This slow, piecemeal accumulation of traits is the reality of evolution. The neat lines of the march of progress dissolve in the face of these fossils, replaced by a much more interesting story of creatures experimenting with new ways of moving and living in a world that was itself in the midst of a profound transformation. The stage was now set. The actors, these mosaic beings, were in place. All that was needed was the right environmental push to send them down two very different paths. These patchwork creatures, our ancestors balanced between the trees and the ground, did not live on a static planet. The world beneath their feet was shifting, groaning, and transforming on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. The engine of the Great Split, the force that would finally push our lineage and the chimpanzee lineage apart, was not a conscious choice or an inner drive to progress. It was the planet's own restless climate. For millions of years during the Miocene, the Earth had been a warmer, wetter place. But as that epoch gave way to the next, the Pliocene, a great cooling began. Tectonic plates shifted, ocean currents rerouted, and vast amounts of water began to get locked away as ice at the poles. This global refrigeration led to a great drying, and nowhere were its effects more profound than in Africa. The reliable continent-spanning rains that had fed the vast tropical forests began to fail. The change was not sudden, like a storm that passes overnight. It was a slow, creeping transformation that unfolded over thousands of generations. A forest that was once a continuous, unbroken canopy of green began to thin at the edges. Open glades appeared and then widened. Patches of woodland became separated by stretches of sun-drenched grassland. What was once an ocean of trees became an archipelago of forest islands in a growing sea of grass. This process, known as forest fragmentation, was the great wedge that drove our ancestors apart. A single widespread population of these proto-hominins, who once roamed freely through a connected woodland, now found themselves broken into smaller, isolated groups. A newly formed river, a stretch of arid grassland too wide to cross safely, or a new mountain range could become an impassable barrier, cutting one group off from another for good. The immense geological activity of the Great Rift Valley only amplified this process. As the continental plates pulled apart, the valley floor sank and the shoulders of the rift rose up, creating colossal mountain ranges that acted as rain shadows, further drying out the lands to their east. For a long time, a popular theory known as the East Side Story proposed that this valley was the ultimate barrier. The apes trapped to its west in the wetter forests evolved into chimpanzees, while those on the drier east side were forced onto the savanna and evolved into humans. We now know the story is more complex, especially since the discovery of fossils like Tomai far to the west, but the core idea holds true. These geological and climatic forces created the isolation necessary for the slow, patient work of evolution to begin sculpting the separated populations in different ways. This isn't just speculation. We have remarkable scientific evidence that allows us to read this ancient climate history. Scientists can drill deep into the ocean floor off the coast of Africa and pull up sediment cores that are, in effect, time capsules. Each layer of accumulated dust and mud contains fossilized pollen and chemical signatures that act as a record of what the climate was like on the nearby continent. By analyzing these cores, they can see the steady decline of tree pollen and the corresponding rise in grass pollen, painting a detailed picture of the forests receding and the savannas expanding. Climatologists and paleontologists still debate the exact pace of these changes, whether the forests receded gradually over millennia or in more rapid, dramatic pulses of climate instability. But the result was the same. The world of our ancestors was sundered. The stage was no longer a single, stable forest. It was now two fundamentally different arenas, two distinct worlds, each with its own set of rules for survival, and the creatures living in them would now have to adapt or vanish. The fracturing of the African landscape was the final, irrevocable event that sealed the fates of our lineage. The single population of ancestors, once united by a shared world, was now scattered across a new and challenging chessboard. They found themselves sorted into two profoundly different ecological arenas, each with its own unique set of problems and its own set of rewards. One group of our ancestors found themselves in the shrinking but still viable pockets of dense forest. For them, the world remained largely the same as it had been for their ancestors for millions of years. It was a vertical world, a three-dimensional universe of trunks, branches, and vines. The most important questions for survival remained unchanged. Where are the ripest fruits? How can I move most efficiently through the canopy to reach them? How do I maintain the social alliances needed to defend this resource-rich territory from rivals? In this stable, familiar environment, natural selection continued to favor the traits that had always meant success. It favored powerful arms and shoulders for climbing and swinging. It favored a mind that could hold a complex mental map of the forest's resources. It favored the intense, close-knit social bonds that could be maintained through the daily ritual of grooming. This was the conservative path, the path of holding on to what worked. This was the path that would, over the next few million years, lead to the modern chimpanzee. But another group found themselves in a radically different situation. They were on the other side of the divide, living on the fringes of the shrinking forests, or pushed out entirely into the great unknown, the expanding African savanna. This was a shocking, horizontal world, a flat, exposed landscape of grass, punctuated by the occasional acacia tree. The sun was relentless. The cover of the canopy was gone, and with it, the safety it provided. New predators, like powerful saber-toothed cats and swift hyenas, roamed this open territory. The old rules for survival were suddenly useless here. The questions were now entirely new. How do I find food when it's not hanging from a branch above me? How do I cross these vast, open spaces without being seen and eaten? How do I protect my young from dangers I can no longer escape by simply climbing a tree? This was a world of immense peril, but also of new opportunities. Hidden beneath the ground were nutritious tubers and roots. Herds of grazing animals roamed the plains, and where there were herds, there were carcasses left behind by predators, a rich source of calories for any creature clever enough to get to them. This fundamental split in environment is confirmed by hard science. By analyzing the carbon isotopes preserved in the tooth enamel of our fossil ancestors, scientists can determine precisely what kind of plants they were eating. Forest plants and savanna grasses use different photosynthetic pathways, resulting in different ratios of carbon isotopes. The fossil teeth tell a clear story of divergence. One lineage continues to show a diet based on forest foods, while the other begins to show the signature of the savanna. Some of the earliest hominin teeth from this period show wear patterns suggesting they were eating tough, fibrous savanna plants, perhaps as fallback foods when their preferred forest fruits were unavailable. They may have been reluctant pioneers at first, pushed out of their comfort zone. Anthropologists are still in a lively debate about what initially drove our ancestors into the savanna. Was it a forced eviction as the forests shrank, or were they actively drawn to new, high-value food sources like animal carcasses and underground tubers? Whatever the reason, the two groups were now locked into two different evolutionary feedback loops. For the proto-chimps in the forest, every generation refined their skills for a life in the trees. For the proto-humans on the savanna, every generation was a desperate and creative experiment in solving the problems of a flat and dangerous world. The two paths, which had started together, now bent away from each other, slowly at first, and then with gathering speed. All the differences that would come to define us, the way we walk, the tools we make, the way we think and speak, can be traced back to this single momentous separation, when the earth itself forced our family tree to branch. Now you stand at the edge of the forest, the familiar green world at your back, and the daunting sun-bleached sea of grass stretching out before you. You are on the human path now, and the first and most fundamental problem you must solve is simply how to move through this new world. To continue knuckle-walking like your ancestors, with your back exposed to the scorching sun and your eyes level with the rustling grass, is to be vulnerable. It is to be slow, inefficient, and blind. The savanna demands a new answer, and that answer is to stand up. The shift to walking on two legs, bipedalism, is the foundational adaptation of our lineage. It is the first great anatomical commitment that separates us from the apes, and it happened millions of years before our brains began to expand or the first stone tool was ever chipped. The discovery of the famous fossil Lucy in 1974 was the moment this became undeniable. Here was a creature with a tiny ape-sized brain, yet her pelvis and leg bones showed she walked upright as confidently as you or I. We were walkers long before we were thinkers. Imagine the feeling of that change. You rise from a crouch, and your whole perception of the world shifts. Your head is now the highest point of your body, a watchtower scanning the horizon. You can see over the grass, spotting the flick of a lion's tail in the distance, or the circling of vultures that signals a potential meal. But the advantages are more than just a better view. The midday sun on the equator is a brutal, life-draining force. By standing upright, you present a much smaller target to its overhead rays. Instead of your entire back baking like a quadruped's, only your head and shoulders take the direct hit. Scientific models show this simple change in posture can reduce your body's solar radiation exposure by as much as 60%. At the same time, it lifts more of your body into the cooler layers of air that flow just above the ground, where breezes can wick away your sweat and help you stay cool. It's a built-in air conditioning system, and it's a critical advantage for an animal needing to travel long distances in the heat. While the classic savanna hypothesis is the leading explanation, some researchers now challenge it, arguing that bipedalism may have first evolved in a woodland setting for reaching fruit in low branches, and only later proved advantageous on the open plains. But perhaps the most profound consequence of standing up is what it does to your hands. For the first time in your entire evolutionary history, your hands are free. They are no longer organs of locomotion, calloused and hardened from bearing your weight. They are now dedicated tools, available at every moment for other tasks. A free hand can carry a clutch of scavenged bird eggs back to your group. It can carry a heavy stone that might be useful later for cracking open a bone for its rich marrow. It can hold your infant close to your chest, allowing you to travel with your vulnerable young while still being able to forage or defend yourself. This liberation of the hands is a turning point of almost unimaginable significance. The potential for everything that is to come, for tools, for art, for gesture, for technology, begins in this simple, revolutionary act of freeing the hands from the burden of walking. Of course, not every theory about this momentous shift is quite so centered on practicalities. In a more provocative and somewhat humorous take, some primatologists have playfully suggested that sexual selection played a role, with males who could stand tall and display their genitals appearing more impressive and dominant, and thus having greater reproductive success. But whatever the combination of reasons, the choice was made. The die was cast. In committing to a life on two legs, your ancestors set a new course. They were betting everything on this strange, unstable, and ultimately powerful way of moving. It was a wager that would pay off spectacularly in the long run, but it also came with a heavy price. It was a radical redesign of a body plan that had been perfected for four-limbed movement over tens of millions of years, and that anatomical rebellion would leave a legacy of aches, pains, and perils that are still written into our skeletons today. This new way of life, this commitment to walking upright, was not a simple adjustment. It was a complete overhaul of your body's chassis, a series of radical engineering compromises that rerouted stresses and strains throughout your entire skeleton. Nothing shows this better than your own spine. In a four-legged animal, the spine acts like a simple suspension bridge, arching upwards to support the weight of the organs below. But when you stand that bridge on its end, it becomes a balancing tower, a stack of bony blocks, your vertebrae, tasked with the incredibly awkward job of supporting the weight of your head, shoulders, and torso. To solve this problem, your spine developed a series of elegant curves, an S shape that acts as a shock absorber. But it is a solution born of compromise. That graceful curve, especially the sharp bend in your lower back, puts immense and constant strain on your vertebrae and the soft discs that cushion them. It's why so many of us in our modern lives are plagued by slipped discs, pinched nerves, and the kind of chronic lower back pain that our chimpanzee cousins, with their straight, bridge-like spines, will never know. It's the price we pay for standing tall. Your feet, too, were completely remade. An ape's foot is a grasping marvel, almost another hand, with a long, opposable big toe, perfect for clinging to branches. Our ancestors had to sacrifice that grasping ability entirely. Your big toe was brought in line with the others, no longer able to splay out. Your foot bones locked together to form two strong, stable arches, a longitudinal arch running from your heel to your toes, and a transverse arch running across the width of your foot. These arches are brilliant shock absorbers, acting like springs that capture and release energy with every step, making long-distance walking incredibly efficient. But in locking up the foot for stability, we gave up our ability to climb with any real skill and created a structure prone to a whole new set of problems, from sprained ankles to fallen arches. The most famous and haunting evidence of these modern feet comes from the Laetoli footprints, a 3.6 million-year-old track of volcanic ash in Tanzania, where 2 or 3 of our ancestors, likely Australopithecus afarensis, walked side by side, leaving behind footprints with a clear heel strike and a well-defined arch, indistinguishable from those you might leave on a wet beach today. But the most dramatic and perilous trade-off occurred in the pelvis. To walk upright without constantly toppling over, your gluteal muscles, your butt muscles, had to be repositioned. To achieve this, the broad, far-flat iliac blades of the ape pelvis, which face backward, had to rotate to the side, creating a compact, bowl-shaped structure. This new arrangement gave you stability, but it came at a terrible cost. It dramatically narrowed the birth canal. For millions of years, this wasn't a major issue. But as our lineage began to evolve larger brains, this pelvic gateway became a crisis point. This is the obstetrical dilemma, one of the cruelest ironies of human evolution. The very adaptation that set us on the path to intelligence, upright walking, created a physical barrier to being born with that intelligence. The result was a brutal evolutionary compromise. Human babies had to be born prematurely by primate standards, ejected from the womb while their skulls are still relatively small and soft enough to squeeze through the narrow passage. This is why human infants are so uniquely helpless, or altricial. A newborn foal can stand within an hour. A newborn chimp can cling to its mother's fur. A human baby is a fragile, utterly dependent creature because a huge part of its development, especially its brain growth, has to happen outside the womb. Childbirth became, and remained for most of our history, one of the leading causes of death for both mother and child. Every single person alive is a descendant of a long line of mothers who survived this perilous journey. Paleoanthropologists continue to debate the exact nature of the Australopithecus gait, whether they walked with the same efficient, straight-legged stride as modern humans, or with a slightly bent knee, bent hip gait that was a compromise between walking and climbing. But what is certain is that the moment our ancestors stood up, they were locked into a new skeletal destiny, one of both incredible potential and persistent, painful flaws. While your skeleton was groaning under the new stresses of walking, your hands were experiencing a glorious new freedom. This is where the trade-off of bipedalism began to pay its first spectacular dividends. A chimpanzee's hand is a masterpiece of engineering for a very specific purpose: life in the trees. Take a look at one, and you'll see long, curved fingers and a relatively short, weak thumb. This structure creates a near-perfect hook, allowing the chimp to suspend its entire body weight with effortless strength, swinging from branch to branch in a fluid motion called brachiation. Their grip is one of raw, crushing power. It's a hand built to hold on for dear life, to crack open tough shells, and to project strength. But it is not a hand built for delicacy. It lacks the anatomical grace for fine, manipulative tasks. It is, in essence, a beautifully crafted hammer. Your hand, by contrast, is a work of profound delicacy. The evolutionary path of your ancestors reshaped it for a completely different purpose. Your fingers became shorter and straighter, and most critically, your thumb became longer, more muscular, and sat further down the palm, allowing it to swing around and easily touch the pad of each of your other fingers. This is the famous opposable thumb, but in its most refined form. This simple ability to bring the tip of the thumb to the tip of a finger is the anatomical basis of the precision grip. It allows you to hold an object delicately between your fingertips, rather than having to clench it in your whole fist. Right now, as you hold the phone or device you're listening on, you are using this ancient gift. This grip is powered by muscles, like the flexor pollicis longus, that are unique to the human lineage and give our thumbs a degree of strength and control that no other primate possesses. This muscle is so significant that its tendon leaves a visible mark on the fossilized thumb bones of our ancestors, allowing us to track when this powerful grip evolved. This anatomical shift created a powerful feedback loop between your hands and your brain. A hand capable of such fine movements is useless without a brain that has the processing power to control it. A huge portion of your brain's motor cortex is devoted to the fantastically complex job of moving your fingers and thumb. At the same time, using your hands for complex tasks, exploring the texture of a stone, manipulating a stick, crafting a tool, sent a constant stream of sensory information back to your brain, stimulating its growth and reorganization. Your hands and your brain began to co-evolve, each pushing the other to become more complex and capable in a virtuous cycle. The hand became the inquisitive agent of the mind, and the mind grew to understand what the hand had discovered. Intriguingly, the fossil record tells us that the potential for this was in place long before it was fully realized. The bones of hominins like Australopithecus afarensis, who lived over 3 million years ago, show a hand that was already capable of a human-like grip, even though there's no widespread evidence that they were making complex stone tools. The anatomy, it seems, came first. The hands were ready, waiting for the cognitive spark to ignite their potential. That spark finally caught about 2.6 million years ago in Ethiopia. This is the date of the earliest known stone tool industry, the older one. These were not complex weapons, just simple river cobbles that had been struck with another stone to knock off a sharp flake. Yet this simple act represents a monumental cognitive leap. It required foresight, an understanding of physics, and the manual dexterity to execute it. With these sharp flakes, our ancestors could now slice through tough animal hides and butcher carcasses, unlocking a treasure trove of calorie-rich meat and marrow. Scientists still debate which hominin species first invented the older one tools. Was it a late Australopithecus or an early member of our own genus, Homo habilis? But whoever it was, with that first intentional fracture of a stone, they opened a new chapter in the story of life, turning a simple hand into an instrument that would one day reshape the entire planet. That first sharp stone flake, knocked from a river cobble, did more than just give your ancestors a cutting edge. It changed the menu. For the first time, they had reliable access to a new, concentrated source of energy, meat and bone marrow. A chimpanzee's diet is overwhelmingly vegetarian, and they spend an enormous part of their day, sometimes up to 6 hours, just chewing tough, fibrous plant matter to extract enough calories to survive. Their entire anatomy is built around this reality. They have a large, long digestive tract designed to slowly ferment and break down all that fiber. This massive gut is a biological necessity for them, but it comes with a hidden cost. It's expensive to run. Your body is like a biological budget, with a limited amount of metabolic energy to spend on all its different systems. You can't afford to have luxury versions of everything. You have to make choices, and evolution makes those choices for you through natural selection. This fundamental principle is known as the expensive tissue hypothesis. It posits that you can't have both a large, expensive gut and a large, expensive brain. Brain tissue is the most metabolically costly tissue in the body, pound for pound. To build a bigger brain, you have to find the energy from somewhere else. The chimpanzee lineage invested its budget in the gut. It built a digestive system capable of turning low-quality plants into life. Our lineage took a different gamble. Armed with stone tools, our ancestors, like the species Homo habilis, who appears in the fossil record around 2.4 million years ago, began to supplement their diet with meat scavenged from carcasses and fat-rich marrow hacked from bones. This new diet was like a high-octane fuel. It was dense in calories and far easier to digest than tough plants. With food quality going up, the need for a huge, energy-guzzling digestive tract went down. Our guts began to shrink. And the energy that was saved, that surplus in the biological budget, was now free to be reinvested elsewhere. It was invested in the brain. The appearance of Homo habilis marks the first time we see a significant jump in brain size in the fossil record, a clear sign that this metabolic trade-off was underway. Scientists are still debating the timeline of this shift, specifically whether the move to eating more meat came first and enabled brain growth, or if a small initial expansion in brain size allowed for the cleverness needed to acquire meat in a classic chicken and egg problem of paleoanthropology. This trade-off is subtly reflected in our own modern biology. Humans who adopt a purely raw food diet often find it extremely difficult to get enough calories to function, a quiet reminder that our bodies are no longer optimized for that ancient, fibrous menu. We have bet our evolutionary survival on high-quality food, and this dietary shift appears to have triggered other changes. Around the same time, a fascinating mutation occurred in our genetic code. A gene known as MYH16 is responsible for producing a key protein that builds the powerful, thick jaw muscles you see in apes. In our lineage about 2.4 million years ago, this gene was disabled. Our jaw muscles became weaker. On the surface, this sounds like a disadvantage, but it may have been a crucial liberation. In apes, these massive chewing muscles wrap around the skull and attach high on the head, effectively acting like a clamp that constrains the growth of the cranium. With those muscles weakened, that constraint was released. The skull was now free to expand, to become more rounded and globular, to accommodate the increasingly expensive and powerful brain growing within it. The shrinking of our jaw was part of the price we paid for the expansion of our minds. We traded brute biting force for the processing power that would eventually allow us to outthink our prey rather than just out-muscle our food. As your ancestors invested more and more in a bigger brain, another profound change was happening on the outside. A change so total that we barely even think about it, yet one that makes us utterly unique among the primates. We became naked. Compared to our furry cousins, from the thick-coated gorilla to the shaggy orangutan, we are conspicuously bare. The question is, why? A thick coat of fur is an incredibly useful tool. It provides insulation against the cold, protects the skin from scratches, and most importantly, in the equatorial sun, it acts as a shield against harmful ultraviolet radiation. Giving it up seems like a terrible evolutionary decision. And yet we did. The leading explanation for this radical undressing is tied directly to that new savanna environment and the high-energy food source we were beginning to exploit. It's all about heat. Imagine a cheetah chasing a gazelle. The chase is an explosive burst of speed, and it's over in less than a minute. Most predators on the savanna are built for this kind of sprinting. But they have a critical weakness. They overheat quickly. A fur coat is a great sun shield, but it's terrible at letting heat out during intense exercise. Our ancestors, lacking the speed of a cheetah or the power of a lion, stumbled upon a different, quieter, and ultimately more effective hunting strategy: persistence. Instead of a short sprint, they engaged in a long, relentless trot, a style of hunting known as endurance running. They would track an animal for hours under the scorching midday sun, not trying to outrun it, but simply to keep it moving, to prevent it from resting and cooling down, until the prey eventually collapsed from heat exhaustion. To pull this off, our ancestors needed a revolutionary cooling system. They got one by losing their fur, and in its place, evolving millions of eccrine sweat glands all over their bodies. We became the sweatiest apes. When you run, your body generates immense heat. By pouring liquid sweat onto your skin, you create a personal evaporative cooler. As the sweat evaporates, it takes a huge amount of heat with it, allowing you to stay cool while performing strenuous activity for hours on end. A fur-covered animal can only pant, which is far less efficient. We traded our fur coat for a radiator. It's an interesting quirk of biology that we aren't technically hairless. A patch of your skin has roughly the same number of hair follicles as a similar patch on a chimpanzee. The difference is that while their follicles produce thick, long, coarse hair, most of yours produce tiny, fine, gossamer-like hairs that are almost invisible. We are not a naked ape, so much as a thinly veiled one. Of course, losing our protective fur had an immediate and dangerous consequence: direct exposure to UV radiation, which can break down essential nutrients in the body like folate. The evolutionary solution to this was to develop our own biological sunscreen. As the fur disappeared, our skin evolved to produce more of the dark pigment melanin, which is incredibly effective at absorbing and scattering UV rays. This is why our earliest furless ancestors were all dark-skinned. It was a non-negotiable requirement for survival on the sunny African savanna. While the endurance hunting hypothesis is the most widely accepted, scientists continue to debate the relative importance of other factors. Perhaps becoming naked made it harder for disease-carrying parasites like ticks and lice to hide on us. In fact, genetic analysis of the lice that live on us provides a strange clue. Human pubic lice are more closely related to gorilla lice than to human head lice, and they diverged about 3 million years ago. This has led some to theorize that our loss of body fur created two isolated islands of hair, head and groin, allowing two different louse species to colonize us, giving us a bizarrely intimate timeline for when we lost our coats. Others argue that smooth, hairless skin became a powerful signal of health and youth, and was therefore favored by sexual selection. The old, and now largely dismissed, aquatic ape hypothesis even suggested we lost our fur during a period spent living in and around water. But the core story remains one of heat and sweat, of an ape that learned to outlast its prey by turning its entire skin into a cooling machine. Your ancestors were now upright, thinly haired, sweaty apes, capable of ranging across the hot savanna, their clever hands enabling them to get more meat, and their shrinking guts allowing more energy to flow to their brains. This new model of hominin was a success, but its brain growth was about to hit a ceiling. There is only so much energy you can get from raw food, even raw meat. A truly revolutionary breakthrough was needed to unlock the next level of our potential, a breakthrough that would change not only our diet and our anatomy, but the very rhythm of our social lives. That breakthrough was the control of fire. It's difficult to overstate the importance of this moment. To tame a flame is to capture a piece of the sun and bring it down to earth. Initially, it would have offered warmth on a cold night, and a flickering wall of light to keep the terrifying predators of the darkness at bay. But its true power was what it did to food. Cooking is, in essence, a form of external digestion. When you place a tough, starchy tuber in the hot embers of a fire, the heat begins to do the work that your stomach and intestines would otherwise have to do. It breaks down complex carbohydrates into simpler, sweeter, more easily digestible sugars. It gelatinizes the collagen in tough cuts of meat, making them tender and soft. It neutralizes many of the natural toxins and bitter compounds that plants produce to defend themselves, opening up a whole new menu of edible vegetation that was previously off-limits. Even more, a cooked meal is a safer meal. The heat kills dangerous bacteria and parasites that could sicken or kill you, a benefit that would have dramatically increased the survival rates of young children and older adults. A chimpanzee has to power its body and brain on the net calories it can wrestle from raw food with its powerful gut. By cooking, our ancestors outsourced a huge part of the digestive process to the fire itself. They created an external stomach. This was a caloric revolution. The same piece of meat, when cooked, could deliver significantly more energy to the body for far less digestive effort. This was the final definitive solution to the problem of the expensive tissue hypothesis. The massive energy surplus unlocked by cooking was exactly what the astonishingly greedy human brain needed to fuel its expansion. The primatologist Richard Wrangham famously argued this point in his cooking hypothesis, suggesting that it wasn't just meat eating, but the advent of cooking that provided the critical energy boost that allowed for the evolution of Homo erectus, a species with a brain almost double the size of its predecessors. The timeline for the control of fire is one of the most contentious topics in paleoanthropology, as it's incredibly difficult to distinguish between the ashes of a natural wildfire and the remains of a deliberate, human-controlled hearth in the archaeological record. But some of the most compelling early evidence comes from Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, where archaeologists found burnt bone fragments and ashen plant remains deep inside the cave, 1 million years ago, far from any likely natural cause. Beyond the biological benefits, fire remade our social world. The hearth became the first true center of human society. It extended the day, pushing back the darkness and creating a new space for social interaction after the foraging was done. Imagine your ancestors gathered around the flickering light. Here, in the warm, safe circle of the fire, food was shared. The day's events could be recounted. Plans could be made for the next day's hunt. It was in this space, protected from the prowling dangers of the night, that the intricate bonds of human community could be woven more tightly. It was here that language, once it began, could be practiced and refined. It was here that the first stories might have been told. The warm glow of a lamp in your room as you settle in for the night is a direct descendant of that ancient, vital flame. The fire fed our bodies, but it also fed our minds and our culture, providing the fuel and the forum that would allow for the next great leap in our journey. The expansion of the brain into an organ of unparalleled complexity. With the caloric floodgates opened by cooked food, the brain of your ancestors began to grow at an unprecedented rate. The species Homo erectus, who emerged on the African stage nearly 2 million years ago, was a turning point. Taller and more slender than their predecessors, with bodies clearly adapted for endurance running, they possessed a brain that was, on average, 50% larger than that of Homo habilis before them. But the secret to the human mind is not simply a matter of size. If it were, then whales and elephants, with their much larger brains, would be the planet's dominant thinkers. The change that set our lineage apart was not just an increase in volume, but a fundamental reorganization of the brain's internal architecture. Your brain is not just a scaled-up chimpanzee brain. It is a rewired, reconfigured, and deeply strange piece of biological machinery. The most dramatic area of expansion is the region just behind your forehead, the prefrontal cortex. In humans, this area has become disproportionately vast compared to other primates. This is the brain's executive suite, the seat of our most abstract and complex mental abilities. It is where you plan for the future, weighing potential consequences and making strategic decisions. It is where you wrestle with complex social situations, trying to understand the intentions and beliefs of others. It is the part of your brain that allows you to override your immediate impulses, to choose the harder, better path over the easy, immediate reward. As you lie there now, your mind drifting, it is your prefrontal cortex that allows you to follow this long, unfolding narrative, to connect ideas across time, and to ponder your own place within this story. While a chimp's mind is a brilliant tool for solving problems in the here and now, your prefrontal cortex gives you the ability to live in a world of what-ifs, to construct elaborate mental models of the past and the future. This expanded cognitive power is also reflected in the brain's wiring. The human brain is packed with an unusually high proportion of white matter, which is essentially the cabling, the long-range neural connections that link different specialized regions of the brain together. This dense network allows for faster and more efficient communication between different processing centers, enabling the kind of integrated, cross-modal thinking that is a hallmark of human creativity and problem-solving. It's also filled with specialized cells. One fascinating example is a type of large, fast-conducting neuron called a von Economo neuron, or VEN. These cells are found only in a few highly social and large-brained animals, like great apes, elephants, and whales. Humans, however, have them in far greater abundance, particularly in areas associated with social emotions, like empathy and intuition. They seem to act as rapid relays for processing complex social information, the very hardware of our deep-seated need to connect and understand one another. Neuroscientists are still debating whether the key to human intelligence lies in the absolute size of our brain, the relative size of certain regions like the prefrontal cortex, or simply the sheer density and speed of its neural connections. But to praise our own brain's unique design is not to diminish the brilliance of the chimpanzees. Theirs is a mind honed by a different set of pressures, and it possesses abilities that can seem almost superhuman to us. In one famous set of experiments, chimpanzees consistently and dramatically outperformed humans on tests of short-term photographic memory. After being shown a screen of numbers for just a fraction of a second, the chimps could perfectly recall the locations of each number in its correct sequence, a task that humans find almost impossible. This isn't a parlor trick. It's likely a critical survival skill for a life that requires remembering the exact location of hundreds of different fruit trees and navigating a complex, three-dimensional forest environment. Their mind is a masterpiece of spatial and situational awareness, an instrument perfectly tuned to the key of their world. Our brain, with its expanded cortex, cleverly folded and wrinkled to maximize its surface area like a cerebral pizza, is simply tuned to a different key, one of social complexity, long-term planning, and, as we would soon see, a strange and powerful new ability to make sense of the world through sound. That complex, rewired brain, humming with new potential, still needed a way to translate its intricate thoughts into a form that could be shared. It needed a voice. A chimpanzee can produce a range of loud and meaningful calls, hoots, pants, screams, but it cannot speak. The limitation is not one of intelligence alone, but of anatomy and genetics. The first piece of the puzzle is in your throat. In most mammals, including a baby human, the larynx, or voice box, sits high in the neck. This arrangement is safe and efficient. It allows them to breathe and swallow at the same time without food going down the wrong pipe. But in humans, around the age of 3 months, a strange migration happens. The larynx descends, moving lower down the throat. This is a terrible piece of plumbing. It creates a shared passage for food and air, the pharynx, making us the only primates that are constantly at risk of choking to death. This dangerous anatomical quirk is a classic evolutionary trade-off. The benefit that outweighed the risk of choking was the creation of a resonant sound chamber. This new, expanded pharynx gave us the ability to modulate sounds in an incredibly wide and subtle range, to form the rich variety of vowels and consonants that are the building blocks of all human languages. But having the right instrument is useless without a musician who knows how to play it. The fine, rapid, and precise motor control needed to produce speech, coordinating the breath, the vocal cords, the tongue, and the lips, is fantastically complex. For a long time, the genetic basis for this ability was a complete mystery. The breakthrough came from studying a single British family, known only as the KE family, who shared a rare inherited disorder. About half the members of this family had severe difficulty with both producing and understanding speech. In 2001, after years of research, scientists finally pinpointed the cause. They all shared a mutation in a single gene. That gene was FOXP2. This discovery was monumental. FOXP2 is not a language gene in the sense that it creates language out of thin air. Rather, it's a master regulatory gene, a conductor for an entire orchestra of other genes. It is active in brain development, helping to wire the neural circuits responsible for fine motor control, particularly of the face and mouth. When scientists compared the human version of FOXP2 to that of other animals, they found it was remarkably conserved. The chimpanzee version is almost identical to the mouse version. But in the human lineage, 2 small but critical changes occurred in the protein the gene produces. These 2 amino acid shifts appear to have fine-tuned the gene's function, contributing to the neural wiring that makes our articulate speech possible. What's even more fascinating is that when scientists sequenced the DNA from Neanderthal bones, they found that they shared the exact same human-like version of FOXP2. This strongly suggests that they, too, had the genetic and likely the anatomical capacity for complex vocalization, shattering the old image of them as grunting, brutish cavemen. The genetic story doesn't end there. Another piece of the puzzle is a stretch of DNA called Human Accelerated Region 1, or HAR1. These accelerated regions are parts of the genome that were stable in most animals, but underwent a burst of rapid change in the human lineage. HAR1 doesn't code for a protein, but it plays a role in guiding the development of the brain's cortex, particularly its characteristic wrinkled and folded structure. These genetic edits, and hundreds of others like them, represent the 1.2% difference in action. They are the subtle tweaks to the blueprint that, when combined with anatomical changes like the descended larynx, laid the biological groundwork for language. Scientists are still debating how much of our language ability is due to specific genetic mutations versus the gradual co-evolution of our brains, anatomy, and culture. But it's clear that deep within our code, a series of small, precise changes gave us the ability to fill the quiet of the night with the most powerful tool our species would ever invent: the spoken word. With the hardware in place, the rewired brain and the replumbed throat, the software of language could finally be loaded. This was not just an upgrade to the existing animal communication system. It was a complete replacement, a new operating system for the mind. A chimpanzee's communication is powerful but limited. They have a specific call for eagle and another for leopard. These are signals locked to the present moment. They are incredibly useful for immediate survival, but they cannot be combined to express a novel idea. A chimp cannot say, "I saw a leopard near the river yesterday, so we should be careful there tomorrow." That sentence, so simple for you to understand, contains the magic ingredient that makes human language unique. Syntax. Syntax is the set of rules, the grammar, that allows us to take a finite number of words and combine them in an infinite number of ways. It is the engine of linguistic creativity. With syntax, we didn't just name things in the world, we began to describe the relationships between them. The most profound power of this new tool was that it liberated us from the prison of the present moment. For the first time, your ancestors could use language to travel in time. They could speak in detail about the past, sharing vital knowledge. A skilled elder could tell a younger forager, "Don't eat those red berries. My brother ate them last season, and he became very sick." This ability to share accumulated experience, to learn from a mistake that someone else made, is a monumental advantage. Knowledge was no longer locked inside a single individual's head, destined to die with them. It could now be transmitted, preserved, and built upon across generations. Even more transformative was the ability to speak about the future. A group of hunters could now sit together and make a detailed plan. "You will hide behind those rocks. I will drive the antelope towards you from the east. When it gets close, you will use your spear." This level of coordinated, strategic action, based on a shared mental simulation of a future event, is impossible without language. This brings us to the power of the abstract, the ability to discuss things that are not physically present, or that may not even exist at all. Language allows us to ask, "What if?" What if we try to hunt in a new way? What if we use this stone to sharpen that stick? This is the foundation of all innovation, but it goes deeper. Language allows us to create and share entire worlds that exist only in our minds. This is the origin of myths, of spirits, of tribal identities, of rules and laws. These shared fictions, made real only through the power of words, would become the glue that could bind human societies together on a scale never before seen in nature. This cognitive shift seems to be reflected in the archaeological record. Around 50,000 years ago, something explosive happens. We see the sudden appearance of sophisticated cave art, complex bone tools, and elaborate burials. Some scholars call this the Great Leap Forward, and many have argued that it was triggered by the final evolution of a fully modern, syntactic language, which lit a fire of creativity across the human world. This new software ran on dedicated hardware in the brain. We have specialized regions, primarily in the left hemisphere, like Broca's area, which handles the production of grammatical sentences, and Wernicke's area, which is crucial for comprehending their meaning. These neural hubs are the physical embodiment of our language instinct. And yet, for all its power, Linguists and cognitive scientists are in a deep and long-standing debate about whether language evolved primarily as a tool for communication between individuals or as a tool for structuring thought within a single mind, a kind of language of thought. Did we first need to talk to each other, or did we first need a way to organize the chaotic flood of information in our own brains? Whatever the answer, the result was the same. A new kind of consciousness was born on Earth, one capable of reflection, planning, and weaving the intricate tapestries of shared belief that would redefine the very meaning of survival. With the power of syntax, your ancestors could now share knowledge and plan for the future. But language had another, perhaps even more profound consequence. It completely revolutionized the scale of human society. For any primate, social life is a complex and demanding affair. It requires you to keep track of who's who is allied with whom, who is a reliable friend, and who is a dangerous rival. The primary tool for building and maintaining the trust needed for this social fabric is physical grooming. But grooming is an intensely intimate and time-consuming activity. You can only groom one individual at a time. This creates a hard ceiling on the size of a social group. The British anthropologist Robin Dunbar discovered this when he found a strong correlation across primate species between the size of their neocortex, the thinking part of the brain, and the average size of their social groups. The math was clear. A bigger brain allowed for tracking more relationships. When he applied this formula to the human neocortex, it predicted a natural group size for us of about 150 people. This is Dunbar's number, the cognitive limit to the number of individuals with whom you can maintain a stable, personal relationship. A chimp troop rarely exceeds 50 or 60. A human hunter-gatherer band, even today, averages around 150. This is the size of a group where everybody knows everybody else. So how did we go from bands of 150 to cities of millions, like the one humming with life outside your window right now in Ho Chi Minh City? The first step, as Dunbar himself proposed, was that language evolved as a more efficient form of grooming. You can talk to several people at once, and while you are talking, you can be doing other things, like mending a tool or preparing food. More importantly, language allows you to groom people who aren't even present. This is the function of gossip. When you share information about the actions and character of a third person, you are reinforcing social norms and updating your knowledge of the group's complex web of relationships. Language allowed our ancestors to hold their bands of 150 together far more efficiently than chimps could with grooming alone. But it still didn't break the 150-person barrier. The final revolutionary leap was when language began to be used not just to describe the real world of people and resources, but to create a new, shared, fictional world. This is the power of myth. A chimpanzee cannot be convinced to give its banana to a stranger by being promised a reward in chimp heaven. A chimp's reality is the physical world in front of it. But humans, with language, could create and believe in abstract concepts. Ancestor spirits, tribal gods, national identities, laws, and justice. These shared fictions, or imagined realities, are the true secret to our large-scale cooperation. Two strangers who have never met can trust each other and work together on a complex task, not because they know each other personally, but because they both believe in the same God, or the same nation, or the same corporate mission statement. It's a trick that is still used today. A modern company, when it grows beyond about 150 employees, has to develop a strong corporate culture and mission statement, a modern myth, to keep everyone aligned. The rise of early large-scale settlements, like the 9,500-year-old town of Çatalhöyük in Turkey, shows that thousands of people were living together in a cooperative society long before writing or formal government, held together by shared rituals and beliefs. Historians and anthropologists are still debating whether this new large-scale cooperation was primarily a tool for better defense against other human groups, or for undertaking massive projects like organized hunts and, eventually, agriculture. But either way, this ability to unite thousands of strangers around a common story was our species' unique superpower. It allowed us to form tribes, then cities, then empires, social structures of a size and complexity that had never before existed on Earth. This new world, woven from the threads of language and myth, was becoming fantastically complex. To navigate the intricate social rules, to master the sophisticated tools, to learn the vast library of shared knowledge, all of this required a brain that was not only large, but also incredibly flexible, capable of learning and adapting for a very long time. This created a new evolutionary pressure, one that would reshape the very rhythm of a human life. It gave us the strange and risky gift of a long childhood. A chimpanzee enters the world and develops at a brisk pace. It clings to its mother for the first few months, but by the age of 4 or 5, it is largely independent, capable of finding its own food and navigating the troop's social life. Its developmental clock is wound tightly, set by the urgent demands of a dangerous forest. Survival favors a quick transition to self-sufficiency. Our lineage took the opposite path. A human child is born spectacularly helpless, a consequence of being born with an underdeveloped brain to fit through that narrow pelvic canal. And that dependency doesn't end quickly. For years, a human child is completely reliant on its parents and the wider social group for food, protection, and comfort. Full self-sufficiency doesn't arrive for a decade or more. We even evolved an entirely new phase of life unheard of in other primates. Adolescence, that long, awkward, and often turbulent runway between the end of childhood and the beginning of full adulthood. From a purely biological perspective, this seems like a terrible strategy. It's inefficient. It puts an enormous, prolonged burden on the parents, especially the mother, and it leaves the young vulnerable for an incredibly long time. So why did we evolve this long goodbye to childhood? Because our survival no longer depended just on instinct, but on culture. Our complex world had to be learned, and learning takes time. That long protected period is the essential download window for the human operating system. It's during these years that the torrent of cultural information, language, social norms, tool-making techniques, myths, and rituals can be patiently absorbed. We can see this developmental shift in the fossil record. By studying the microscopic growth lines in fossilized tooth enamel, which are laid down daily like tree rings, paleoanthropologists can determine how quickly an individual was growing and maturing. This evidence shows that our early ancestors, like Australopithecus, grew up at a faster, more ape-like pace. The long, slow childhood we know today is a more recent innovation, likely beginning with Homo erectus and becoming progressively longer over time. A huge part of this learning process is disguised as something we often dismiss as frivolous. Play. For a human child, play is not just for fun. It is a critical evolutionary adaptation. It is the safe simulator in which they practice the skills they will need as adults. When children play fight, they are learning to manage aggression and test their physical limits. When they play house, they are rehearsing the social roles of family and community. When they build with blocks or draw imaginary figures, they are developing the fine motor skills and creativity that were once used for making tools. Play is the hard work of childhood, the biological program for wiring a brain to fit into a complex cultural world. But this prolonged, resource-intensive childhood was only possible because of another unique human adaptation, the support of the wider family, particularly grandmothers. This is the grandmother hypothesis. In most primate species, females die not long after their reproductive years are over. Human females, with menopause, live for decades after they can no longer have children. This theory proposes that this long post-reproductive lifespan is an adaptation. Grandmothers, freed from raising their own infants, could help their daughters by providing food and childcare for their grandchildren. This support network eased the burden on the mothers, allowing them to have more children, and it ensured the vulnerable young had a better chance of survival. Anthropologists are still debating the primary driver for this extended childhood. Was it a biological necessity to allow a large brain to grow, or was it a cultural necessity to allow for the transmission of complex knowledge and skills? Most likely, it was a feedback loop of both. A bigger brain required more time to grow, and that extra time provided the perfect window to absorb the culture that a bigger brain could create. That long childhood provided the fertile ground for human culture to take root and blossom. For a long time, we defined ourselves as the cultural animal, believing that the world of shared knowledge, traditions, and tools was our exclusive domain. But as we began to watch our chimpanzee cousins more closely, spending decades patiently observing them in their forest homes, we discovered that this, too, was a false boundary. We are not the only cultural beings. The echoes of culture can be heard in the quiet of the African rainforest, though it plays a different, simpler melody. Culture, in its most basic biological sense, is simply any behavior that is learned socially from others and passed down through a group, rather than being inherited genetically. And by this definition, chimpanzees are profoundly cultural animals. The breakthrough in this understanding came in 1960. A young Jane Goodall, observing the chimpanzees of Gombe in Tanzania, saw something that would change primatology forever. She watched a chimp named David Greybeard carefully select a twig, strip it of its leaves, and then insert it into a termite mound. When he pulled it out, it was covered in termites, which he then ate. He was not just using a tool, he was making one. This discovery was a landmark that shattered the long-held belief that humanity began with the first tool. We now know that the forests of Africa are home to a rich mosaic of different chimpanzee cultures, each with its own unique set of traditions. In the Thai forest of Ivory Coast, the chimps have a Stone Age culture. They expertly use heavy stones as hammers and flat tree roots as anvils to crack open the tough shells of nuts. A highly complex skill that takes a young chimp years of observation and practice to master. Yet just a few 100 kilometers away, in Gombe, the chimps have plenty of nuts and plenty of stones, but they have never developed this tradition. Their local culture is centered on termite fishing. The variations are not just about tools. In the Mahale Mountains of Tanzania, chimps have a unique social custom called hand clasp grooming, where two individuals will sit facing each other, each raising an arm, and grasp hands overhead while grooming each other with their free hand. This is a purely social ritual, a local greeting that is absent in other chimp communities. Even more strikingly, some traditions seem to be purely stylistic, with no obvious purpose, much like a human fashion trend. In a group of chimps in Zambia, a female named Julie inexplicably took to sticking a long blade of grass in her ear. Soon, other chimps in her group began to copy her, and the grass-in-ear trend spread. It offered no benefit. It was simply a local fad, a testament to the power of social learning. This vast body of long-term observational research provides the undeniable evidence for chimp culture. But it also highlights the critical difference between their culture and ours. Chimp traditions are passed down through incredibly high-fidelity imitation. A young chimp watches its mother crack nuts and, over years, learns to replicate her exact movements. But what you almost never see is a young chimp taking that technique and actively improving upon it, finding a better kind of stone or designing a more efficient anvil. The traditions are maintained, but they remain static. They are passed on, but they do not accumulate improvements over time. Primatologists continue to debate the extent of this cultural transmission, particularly whether chimpanzees learn through simple imitation of the actions, or if they possess a deeper understanding of cause and effect, a level of cognition known as emulation. But this lack of cumulative change is the great divide. To watch a young chimp learn is to see the beautiful flickering spark of culture in its earliest form. But to understand human history is to understand how that spark, in our lineage, was fanned into a roaring, ever-intensifying flame of cumulative innovation. The traditions of the forest are beautiful and enduring, but they are also caught in a loop. A chimpanzee mother teaches her child to crack a nut, and that child will one day teach its own child the very same technique. The knowledge is preserved, a vital inheritance that sustains their way of life. But human culture broke free of this loop. It began to accumulate. The psychologist Michael Tomasello gave this unique human ability a powerful name: the ratchet effect. Imagine a ratchet wrench, the kind that clicks forward to tighten a bolt but is prevented from slipping backward. Human culture works in the same way. An individual makes a small improvement to a tool or a technique, and that new, better version becomes the new baseline for the entire group. The next generation doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. They start from the improved version and then add their own small innovations, clicking the ratchet forward another notch. This process, repeated over and over, is what transforms a simple sharpened stick into a laser-guided missile, and a campfire story into a global library accessible from a device in your hand. One of the key secrets to this ratcheting mechanism is our peculiar style of learning. Experimental studies comparing human children and chimpanzees have revealed a fascinating difference. When shown a complex series of actions to get a reward, both species will imitate what they see. But if the demonstration includes steps that are obviously unnecessary and inefficient, the chimpanzee will often cut through the noise. It understands the goal, and it will skip the pointless actions to get the reward more directly. This is called emulation. Human children, in contrast, will slavishly copy every single step, including the nonsensical ones. This is known as over-imitation. On the surface, this makes us look less intelligent, more like mindless copycats. But this instinct to copy with extreme fidelity, to trust that the process is important even when you don't understand why, is the very glue that holds complex cultural traditions together. It ensures that crucial but perhaps subtle steps in a tool-making process or a food preparation technique are preserved, even if their purpose isn't immediately obvious. Cognitive scientists are still debating why humans are such prolific over-imitators. Is it an adaptive mechanism for learning complex, opaque tool-making processes? Or is it a social mechanism for signaling conformity and belonging to a group? Another critical ingredient is our instinct to actively teach. A chimpanzee mother is tolerant of her child watching her, and the child learns through that persistent observation. But she does not actively instruct. She doesn't break down the process into steps, correct the child's grip on the hammerstone, or offer verbal encouragement. Human parents, by contrast, are obsessive teachers. We simplify tasks, point out important features, and provide constant feedback. This intentional transfer of knowledge dramatically speeds up the learning process and ensures that complex information is passed down with much higher fidelity. But the final, and perhaps most powerful, piece of the ratchet is our invention of external memory. At first, our knowledge was stored only in the fragile, mortal brains of individuals and passed down through oral history. Then we began to store it outside of ourselves, in the stunning cave paintings of Lascaux, in the first systems of writing on clay tablets. This was revolutionary. An idea could now outlive its creator by millennia. But the true explosion of the ratchet effect came with an invention around the year 1440, the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg's creation made it possible to replicate and distribute information cheaply and accurately on a massive scale. Knowledge that was once the property of a few could now be shared across entire continents. Ideas could meet, combine, and spawn new ideas at an unprecedented rate, directly fueling the explosion of innovation in the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. The ratchet was now supercharged. What had once clicked forward slowly over centuries was now spinning with breathtaking speed, carrying us into a world of ever-accelerating complexity that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors, and that remains entirely outside the realm of our patient, observing cousins in the forest. While human culture was ratcheting up into ever greater complexity, chimpanzee culture remained grounded in the tangible, day-to-day reality of their social lives. And that social world is a dramatic and deeply political theater, a constant whirlwind of alliances, rivalries, friendships, and betrayals. To understand a chimpanzee is to understand that they are, above all else, intensely political beings. Their communities are known as fission-fusion societies. This means that the main community, which might number 50 or more individuals, rarely travels together in one large group. Instead, it breaks apart, or fissions, into smaller, temporary foraging parties that change in size and composition throughout the day, before coming back together, or fusing, perhaps to nest for the night. This fluid social structure requires a sharp mind, a keen awareness of who is currently with whom and who is on good terms with whom. At the heart of this drama is the struggle for status. The life of an alpha male, for instance, is far more complex than just being the biggest and strongest. While physical power is a prerequisite, it's rarely enough to secure the top spot on its own. The path to power, and the ability to hold on to it, is paved with political cunning. A successful alpha must be a master coalition builder. He spends a huge amount of his time grooming key allies, sharing valuable food resources like meat with his supporters, and intervening in disputes to maintain a semblance of order. His reign is one of constant vigilance, always watching for a younger rival who might be trying to form a coalition against him. The primatologist Frans de Waal, in his groundbreaking 1982 book, Chimpanzee Politics, was the first to describe this world using the language of Machiavelli, revealing a social intelligence so sophisticated and strategic that it forever changed our view of the ape mind. The currency in this political economy, the social glue that holds it all together, is grooming, the patient, meticulous act of picking through another's fur builds trust, diffuses tension, and solidifies alliances. It is a tangible investment of time and energy that says, "I am with you." But their social intelligence can also be manipulative. In a stunning display of social savvy, a lower-ranking male might sometimes pick up an infant before approaching the alpha male. He seems to understand that the dominant male is much less likely to behave aggressively toward him while he is holding a baby, a political tool used to gain safe access or to curry favor. But there is a dark side to this intense, close-knit social world. While cooperation within the group is strong, the relationship between different chimpanzee communities is often one of extreme and violent hostility. Long-term studies from the field have documented a chilling behavior: territorial patrols. A party of males from one group will gather and move silently and purposefully towards the edge of their territory. They move with a tense, focused vigilance, listening for any sign of intruders. If they encounter a lone individual from a neighboring community, particularly a male, the patrol will often erupt into a coordinated, brutally violent, and sometimes lethal attack. This organized, lethal intergroup aggression provides a haunting echo of human warfare. Primatologists continue to debate the evolutionary roots of this lethal aggression. Is it an adaptive strategy for acquiring more territory and resources? Or is it a non-adaptive pathological response to human encroachment and habitat disruption? Whatever its origin, it reveals that the capacity for both deep in-group loyalty and lethal out-group hostility is a trait that runs deep in our shared lineage. This is the world of the chimpanzee: intimate, intelligent, and unforgiving. A society built and bounded by the relationships that can be managed through direct, personal, and constant interaction. The political world of your human ancestors, while born from that same primate blueprint of status and alliance, was being remade by the new software of language and myth. Where chimpanzee society is an intense autocracy of alpha dominance, early human society appears to have taken a sharp turn towards a fierce egalitarianism. In a small hunter-gatherer band, where survival depends on the cooperative efforts of everyone, the rise of a single domineering alpha male who tries to monopolize resources is a threat to the entire group. Armed with language and eventually with better weapons, the rest of the group could for the first time effectively band together to counter and control any aspiring bullies. Modern studies of surviving hunter-gatherer groups, like the Jew Hoansi of the Kalahari, reveal that they have deeply ingrained social rules for leveling anyone who becomes too arrogant. They use teasing, gossip, and ridicule to gently but firmly cut down anyone who tries to place themselves above the group. This instinct for a reverse dominance hierarchy, where the group controls the leader rather than the other way around, likely has deep roots in our past. But the truly radical departure from the chimpanzee model was in how human groups defined themselves. A chimp's identity is personal. It knows who is in its group because it knows every member by sight, sound, and smell. Its world is divided into familiar insiders and dangerous outsiders. Human identity, supercharged by language, became symbolic. Your ancestors began to create identity markers that were not based on personal acquaintance, but on shared, abstract symbols. This is the birth of the tribe. The tribe is a group of people, often numbering in the thousands and spread out over a large territory, who may never all meet, but who consider themselves one people. They are bound together by a shared language or dialect, a common creation myth, the worship of the same ancestor spirits. and the use of the same styles of body paint, tattoos, or ritual adornments. This symbolic glue was infinitely more scalable than the physical glue of grooming. It's in this period, during the Upper Paleolithic, that we see the explosion of symbolic artifacts in the archaeological record, like the incredible 40,000-year-old Lion Man statue found in Germany. Not a real animal, but a being of myth, a clear sign of a mind living in a shared symbolic world. This new tribal identity had another revolutionary consequence. While chimpanzee groups are almost universally hostile to one another, human tribes developed a new kind of relationship. Guarded but cooperative interaction. Archaeological evidence for this is widespread and irrefutable. We find stone tools made from a specific type of high-quality obsidian hundreds of miles away from the volcano it was sourced from. This is a clear fingerprint of long-distance trade networks, showing that different bands were exchanging valuable resources. This network acted as a form of social insurance. If your local hunting grounds failed one season, you could rely on your trading partners in the next valley to help you. This intergroup safety net is a uniquely human invention, a level of cooperation between strangers that would be unthinkable in the world of our chimp cousins. It allowed our species to be far more resilient in the face of local disasters and climate shifts. Of course, this doesn't mean that human prehistory was a peaceful utopia. The same symbolic identity that can bind one group of strangers together can also create a fiercer, more defined sense of us versus them, potentially fueling more organized and lethal conflict than the chaotic skirmishes of chimps. Anthropologists are in a long-standing debate about the nature of prehistoric violence, with some arguing that life was far more violent than today, and others arguing that peaceful cooperation and resource sharing were much more common. But what is certain is that the social game had changed. Human society was no longer bounded by the limits of personal recognition. It was now an ever-expanding web of symbolic relationships, capable of connecting vast numbers of people across immense distances, a web that has grown over the millennia into the global, interconnected network of trade, ideas, and culture that you inhabit today. For the entire journey so far, we have been looking at our family tree as a simple fork, with our path branching away from the chimpanzees. But the reality of our past is a far thicker, more tangled bush. As your ancestors began their journey out of Africa and into the wider world, they were not stepping onto an empty stage. The planet was already home to other kinds of humans, cousins who had left Africa in earlier waves of migration and had been evolving on their own paths for hundreds of thousands of years. We were not alone. The most famous of these lost cousins are the Neanderthals. For over a century, their name has been a synonym for brutish stupidity, a caricature of a knuckle-dragging caveman. This image is a deep and persistent injustice. The Neanderthals were not a failed experiment or a clumsy, rough draft of ourselves. They were a highly successful and intelligent species of human who thrived for over 300,000 years across a vast territory from Spain to Siberia, enduring the brutal cyclical ice ages of Pleistocene Europe. When the first Neanderthal fossils were discovered in Germany's Neander Valley in 1856, the scientific establishment of the time was bewildered. The prominent pathologist Rudolf Virchow dismissed them as the diseased skeleton of a modern human Cossack soldier suffering from rickets and arthritis. It took decades for science to accept them for what they were, a different kind of human. Their bodies were a masterclass in adaptation to a cold, hard world. They were shorter and stockier than us, a build that conserves heat. Their bones were thicker and more robust, supporting a musculature of immense power. Their faces were dominated by a large projecting nose, which likely served to warm and humidify the frigid, dry air of Ice Age Europe before it hit their lungs. And their brains? On average, they were slightly larger in volume than our own today. Their skulls were shaped differently, longer and lower, where ours is high and round, suggesting a different internal organization, but in terms of sheer cranial capacity, they were our equals. Their lives were anything but simple. They were apex predators, masters of their icy domain. They crafted a sophisticated and effective toolkit of stone implements, known as the Mysterian industry, with beautifully made spear points and scrapers for processing hides. We know they were formidable hunters of large game like mammoths, woolly rhinos, and giant cave bears, a task that would have required immense courage, strength, and sophisticated group coordination. They lived in small family groups, cared for their sick and elderly. We have found skeletons of older individuals with healed injuries who could not have survived for years without social support. And they were the first species on Earth that we know of who consistently buried their dead. This last point is a source of deep fascination and debate. Some Neanderthal grave sites contain bodies that seem to have been deliberately placed in a specific posture, sometimes with grave goods like animal bones or stone tools. Paleoanthropologists are still in a passionate debate over the symbolic capacities of Neanderthals, whether their burials were truly ritualistic and imbued with a concept of an afterlife, or simply a practical way to dispose of a body and prevent scavengers. But either way, it shows a level of social care and awareness that is profoundly human. Furthermore, the discovery of Neanderthal hyoid bones, a small, U-shaped bone in the neck that anchors the tongue and is critical for speech, that are virtually identical to our own, combined with the fact that they shared our version of the FOXP2 gene, strongly suggests they had the capacity for complex spoken language. For hundreds of thousands of years, the world held at least two intelligent, talking, tool-making human species. Their story is not a side note to our own. It is a parallel epic, and its tragic end would leave our own species in a strange and solitary position on the planet. The Neanderthals were our most well-known cousins, a familiar ghost in the human family album. But in the 21st century, a new and far more mysterious ghost emerged, not from a complete skeleton, but from a fleck of dust and the almost miraculous science of ancient DNA. In a cave called Denisova, nestled in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, archaeologists found a tiny fragment of a finger bone from a young girl who lived more than 50,000 years ago. There wasn't enough of it to tell what kind of human she was from anatomy alone. But a team of scientists, led by the pioneer of paleogenetics, Svante Pääbo, managed to do something that would have been science fiction just a generation ago. They extracted and sequenced her entire genome. The result was a bombshell. The DNA did not belong to a modern human, nor did it belong to a Neanderthal. It was something entirely new, a third, distinct branch of the human family tree. They were named the Denisovans, after the cave in which they were found. This discovery was revolutionary. For the first time, an entire species of human had been discovered not by the shape of their bones, but by the letters of their genetic code. The Denisova cave itself has since proven to be a remarkable crossroads of ancient humanity. We now know it was inhabited at various times by all three groups: Neanderthals, Denisovans, and our own Homo sapiens ancestors. In 2018, the cave offered up its most incredible secret yet: a tiny bone fragment from a teenage girl nicknamed Denny, whose DNA revealed that her mother was a Neanderthal and her father was a Denisovan. This was the fossilized proof of a first-generation hybrid, a direct snapshot of these two ancient human groups meeting and having children together. But the story gets even more personal. When scientists compared these ancient genomes to ours, they found that the story of Deni and her parents was not a one-off event. As our Homo sapiens ancestors spread out of Africa, they encountered and interbred with both the Neanderthals in the west and the Denisovans in the east. They did not simply replace these other humans, they mixed with them. The proof is humming quietly inside your own cells right now. If your ancestry is from outside of sub-Saharan Africa, you likely carry between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA in your genome. If you have ancestry from Southeast Asia, particularly Melanesia or Papua New Guinea, you may carry an additional 3 to 5% Denisovan DNA. These are not junk souvenirs from our ancient past. This inherited DNA is functional. The genes we acquired from these cousins were often beneficial, providing a kind of genetic shortcut to adapting to new environments. For instance, many of the Neanderthal genes that are common in modern Europeans and Asians are related to keratin, a protein that affects skin and hair. These genes may have helped our African ancestors adapt more quickly to the colder climates and lower UV radiation levels of the north. The legacy of the Denisovans is just as powerful. Modern Tibetans are able to live and thrive in the thin, low oxygen air of the high plateau, an environment that would sicken most other people. Their secret is a specific variant of a gene called EPAS1, which regulates the body's response to oxygen levels. It turns out they inherited this life-saving gene directly from the Denisovans, who must have been adapted to high-altitude life long before we arrived. This ancient intermingling has completely rewritten the story of our species. We are not a pure lineage that conquered the world. We are hybrids, a mosaic of different human ancestors. And the story may be even more complex. Geneticists are now searching for other ghost populations in modern human DNA, stretches of unusual genetic code that don't match Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA, suggesting our ancestors may have interbred with other, as yet undiscovered archaic hominin groups in Africa and Asia. The crisp lines of the family tree are dissolving into a tangled, interconnected web. This new, tangled picture of our past, with its hybrid children and ghost populations, makes the final chapter of this story all the more haunting. For hundreds of thousands of years, the planet was home to a diversity of human minds. Different ways of being human coexisted. And then, in a geological blink of an eye, there was only one. The Neanderthals, who had weathered countless ice ages, vanished from the fossil record around 40,000 years ago. The Denisovans, whose range we are only beginning to understand, faded away around the same time. This leaves us with the great, unsettling mystery. Why did we survive when our close, intelligent, and well-adapted cousins did not? What was so special about us? The answer is likely not a single dramatic event, but a complex tapestry of small advantages, bad luck, and a changing world. One major factor was likely simple demographics. The migrating waves of Homo sapiens coming out of Africa were part of a much larger, more interconnected global population. The Neanderthals, by contrast, lived in smaller, more isolated groups, scattered across the vastness of Ice Age Europe. Even if we only had a slight edge, our sheer numbers would have been a powerful force. When two populations compete for the same resources, the larger one often has an inherent advantage. This leads to one of the most popular and perhaps most gentle theories, that they were not violently wiped out, but simply swamped and absorbed. Through generations of interbreeding, their distinct genetic signature was diluted into our much larger gene pool until they ceased to exist as a separate people. Another possibility is that we had a slight, but critical, competitive edge. While Neanderthal toolkits were effective, the tools brought by our arriving ancestors were arguably more innovative and diverse. We see the appearance of new long-distance hunting weapons, like the spear thrower or atlatl, which would have allowed our ancestors to hunt dangerous megafauna more safely and effectively than a Neanderthal with a thrusting spear. We also find the first definitive evidence of bone needles, a seemingly humble invention that implies the ability to create tailored, multi-layered clothing, which would have been a massive advantage for surviving the brutal cold of the European winters. Some researchers have also suggested that Neanderthals were hampered by their own success. Their powerful, stocky bodies required significantly more calories to maintain than our leaner frames. During the periods of extreme climate instability that marked this era, this higher metabolic cost could have been a fatal disadvantage when food became scarce. And the climate was indeed unstable. The world was sliding towards the peak of the last ice age, a period of wild and rapid climate swings that would have put immense pressure on all life. It's possible that the Neanderthals, adapted for a specific kind of cold weather hunting, were less flexible in the face of these changes than the newly arrived versatile Homo sapiens, who brought with them the larger social networks and long-distance trade connections that could act as a buffer against hard times. The debate over the extinction of the Neanderthals is one of the most fraught in the field, with some researchers favoring a model of direct, violent replacement and others favoring a more complex model of outcompetition, climate pressure, and eventual absorption. The truth is likely a messy combination of all of the above. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. We are the last humans standing. As you sit here in the quiet of the night, a member of a species that now numbers in the billions, take a moment to imagine that other world. A world where you might have looked across a valley and seen a different kind of person tending a fire. A world that held more than one way of thinking, of dreaming, of being human. Their absence has left us in a state of profound and unprecedented loneliness. We are a solitary twig on a branch that was once teeming with life. And this solitude has, perhaps, shaped us more than we can ever know, leaving us to forever wonder what it might have been like to look our cousins in the eye and recognize a different but equal mind looking back. Our solitary position on the planet, as the last remaining human, can feed a subtle kind of arrogance. It can make us feel as though our story is complete, that we have arrived at the finish line. We look at our technology, our medicine, our cities, and it's easy to believe that we have somehow stepped outside the river of evolution and are now standing on the bank, watching the rest of nature flow by. But this is an illusion. The same forces that shaped us on the ancient savanna are still at work on us today, though the landscape has changed. Your body and your genes are not a finished product. They are a snapshot of a process that is still unfolding, quietly and relentlessly, with every new generation. We are the unfinished ape. The clearest evidence of this comes from a simple glass of milk. For the vast majority of human history, and for all other mammals, the enzyme that allows us to digest lactose, the sugar in milk, shuts down after infancy. Milk was a food for babies. But beginning around 12,000 years ago, some human groups began to do something new. They domesticated animals like cattle and goats. This agricultural revolution created a powerful new selective pressure. In a community that herded cattle, any adult who happened to have a random genetic mutation that allowed them to keep producing that enzyme, lactase, had access to a rich, reliable new source of calories, protein, and fat. They were healthier, stronger, and their children had a better chance of survival. This advantage was so immense that the mutation for lactase persistence swept through these dairy farming populations. Genetic analysis shows this happened independently at least 5 different times in different parts of the world, a stunning example of convergent evolution in recent human history. If your ancestry is from Europe or parts of East Africa, you can probably digest milk as an adult. If your ancestry is from a region that did not have a long history of dairy farming, you are likely lactose intolerant, which is actually the original default state for our species. The examples are everywhere. We have already seen how Tibetan populations recently evolved adaptations to thrive in the thin air of the high mountains. Similarly, in regions where malaria is common, various genetic mutations that offer protection against the disease, like the sickle cell trait, have become widespread, even though they can have negative side effects. The intense pressure of the parasite outweighed the cost of the defense. Our modern world has not stopped this process. It has simply changed the rules of the game. Our new savanna is the city. It is a world of new diets, new diseases, and new social structures. The shift to a high-carbohydrate, high-sugar diet is putting immense pressure on our metabolic systems, which evolved in an environment of scarcity. The genes that were once advantageous for storing fat may now be a liability. Some studies have even suggested that the human brain has been slowly shrinking for the last 10,000 years. Perhaps as we began living in large, complex societies, we started offloading our cognitive tasks onto the group, allowing our brains to become more efficient at the cost of some of the raw generalist power our ancestors needed. So, is our evolution speeding up or slowing down? Geneticists and anthropologists are now debating whether human evolution is actually accelerating, as the massive size of our global population creates more opportunities for new mutations to arise, and our rapidly changing culture creates novel selective pressures to act upon them. As you sleep tonight in a city of millions, your body is a living testament to this ongoing story. Your genes carry the legacy of ancient diets, ancient plagues, and ancient migrations. And they are also the raw material for the future, the clay that will be shaped by the pressures of a world our ancestors could never have imagined. The river of evolution has not stopped. We are still in it, and it is carrying us toward an unknown shore. While our own lineage continues its strange, accelerating dance with evolution, our chimpanzee cousins are also unfinished. They are not static relics of the past. The same slow, patient engine of natural selection is at work in their populations too, shaping them in response to the pressures of their world. The clearest evidence of this is written in their blood. Chimpanzees are subject to their own host of diseases, including the simian immunodeficiency virus, or SIV, a close relative of the virus that causes AIDS in humans. Genetic analysis of chimpanzee populations shows that their immune systems have been in a long and desperate arms race with this virus for thousands of years. We can see the genetic fingerprints of this war in their DNA, with certain immune system genes showing clear signs of recent, powerful selection, favoring any mutation that provides even a slight edge against the pathogen. They are adapting, generation by generation, to the invisible threats in their environment. But today, the single greatest evolutionary pressure on the chimpanzee is not a virus or a predator from their ancient past. It is us. We have, in just a few centuries, so radically altered the planet that we have ushered in a new geological epoch, one that scientists are beginning to call the Anthropocene. This is the age of humans, an era where our activity has become the dominant force shaping the world's ecosystems. And for the chimpanzee, the Anthropocene is a time of immense and brutal pressure. The forests they have called home for millions of years are being cut down for timber and cleared for agriculture at a terrifying rate. Their once continuous habitat is now a shattered mosaic of isolated fragments, a landscape that traps and divides their populations, cutting off gene flow and leaving them vulnerable. This new, human-made environment is forcing them to adapt or die. In some areas where their forests now border human farms, chimpanzees have developed a risky new cultural tradition: crop raiding. They venture out of the trees to steal maize, bananas, or sugarcane. This is a high-risk, high-reward behavior. It provides a new source of calories in a shrinking world, but it also brings them into direct and often fatal conflict with humans. The individuals who are boldest, cleverest, and best at navigating this dangerous new interface between worlds may be the ones who survive to pass on their genes. We are, in effect, selecting for a new kind of chimpanzee, one that can cope with a life lived in the shadow of our own species. But the pace of this change may be too fast for the slow work of evolution to keep up. Chimpanzees are a critically endangered species. Their populations are plummeting due to habitat loss, the illegal bushmeat trade, and diseases passed on from humans. We have become an extinction event in motion. Their evolutionary future, the very survival of their branch on the tree of life, is no longer in their own hands. It is in ours. Their story has become inextricably bound to our own, not just by a shared past, but by a shared and perilous present. Conservation biologists are now engaged in a critical debate about the best way to protect them. Should we create vast, isolated reserves to shield them from our impact? Or should we develop new strategies for a sustainable coexistence between humans and apes in the landscapes we now share? As you rest tonight in a world built by and for humans, their separate evolutionary journey continues in the dwindling forests. But the path ahead for them is no longer being shaped by the slow dance of climate and geology, but by the rapid and often thoughtless hand of their last remaining cousin. Our growing power has made us the reluctant gardeners of the planet, tending to the evolutionary future of species like the chimpanzee with a clumsy and often destructive hand. But as we enter the 21st century, we are turning that power inward. We are on the cusp of seizing the tiller of our own evolution, transitioning from being passive subjects of natural selection to being the active authors of our own biological and cultural destiny. This is a shift as profound as the discovery of fire or the invention of language. For 4 billion years, the story of life on Earth has been written by the slow, blind, and patient process of random mutation and environmental pressure. Now, a new chapter is beginning, one driven by 3 powerful and accelerating new forces: the editing of our genes, the rise of artificial intelligence, and the breakneck speed of global culture. The first and most direct of these forces is genetic engineering. With the development of revolutionary tools like CRISPR-Cas9, for which its creators won a Nobel Prize, we have for the first time the ability to edit the letters of our own genetic code with precision and ease. What began as a tool for research has now become a medical reality. Gene therapies are already being used to cure debilitating inherited diseases, offering hope where there was none. But this incredible power brings with it a question that cuts to the very core of our identity. Bioethicists, scientists, and policymakers are locked in a global debate over the profound ethical questions raised by these technologies, particularly where to draw the line between therapy, curing disease, and enhancement, improving on normal human traits. Today we talk of eliminating cystic fibrosis or sickle cell anemia. Tomorrow, will we be talking of enhancing intelligence, strength, or even emotional predispositions? For the first time, the evolution of our species may become a matter of conscious choice, a process of deliberate design. The second force is not biological, but computational, artificial intelligence. AI is not just another tool. It is a new kind of mind, co-evolving with our own. It is already shaping the world we live in, curating the information we see, guiding our decisions, and augmenting our own cognitive abilities. As it grows more powerful, it will become an even more potent evolutionary force. It will accelerate our scientific discoveries, reshape our economies, and alter the very way we think and learn. The long-standing partnership between our biology and our Stone Age tools is being replaced by a new symbiosis between the human mind and the silicon mind. The ideas and cultural trends that thrive in a world increasingly mediated by AI may be very different from those that thrived before, creating a new and powerful selective pressure on our habits, our beliefs, and our societies. The ideas of transhumanism, a movement that advocates for merging with technology to enhance our abilities, are moving rapidly from the realm of science fiction into plausible reality. The third force is the one we are all swimming in every day, the hyper-acceleration of cultural evolution. The internet has connected the global human population into a single, vast, networked brain. An idea, a trend, or a new technology can now spread from one side of the world to the other in an instant. This is the ratchet effect turned up to an almost deafening speed. Our brains, which evolved for the slow and steady pace of a hunter-gatherer world, are now struggling to adapt to a constant, overwhelming flood of information. This is creating new psychological and social pressures that we are only just beginning to understand. These three forces, acting in concert, mean that the future of human evolution will likely look nothing like its past. The slow, generational march of genetic change is being overtaken by the blistering pace of technological and cultural change. We are stepping into the unknown, becoming the first species on Earth to consciously and deliberately wrestle with the question of what we want to become next. This newfound power to direct our own evolution, to choose what we become, is both exhilarating and terrifying, and it carries with it the echoes of a dark and painful history. The story of evolution is one of the most powerful and illuminating ideas science has ever produced, but its language and concepts have also been twisted and misused in the past to justify some of the greatest atrocities in human history. This misuse is almost always rooted in that same simple and stubbornly persistent mistake we began with: the idea of the ladder of progress. If evolution is a ladder, it becomes dangerously easy to imagine that some people are on higher rungs than others. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this flawed logic gave rise to the ideology of social Darwinism. Thinkers took the phrase survival of the fittest, a term coined not by Darwin, but by the sociologist Herbert Spencer, and applied it crudely to human societies, politics, and races. They used the veneer of scientific authority to argue that some ethnic groups were more evolved or biologically superior to others, providing a supposed justification for colonialism, racism, and deep social inequality. This culminated in its most horrific form in the eugenics movement, which actively sought to control human breeding based on these false racial hierarchies, leading to policies of forced sterilization in the United States, and ultimately providing the pseudo-scientific rationale for the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. This history is a brutal reminder that scientific ideas are never just ideas. They have consequences. It places a profound ethical responsibility on scientists, educators, and storytellers to communicate the truths of evolution with clarity, care, and a constant awareness of how it can be misinterpreted. It's why the language we use matters so much. When we casually use words like primitive or advanced to describe a species, we are unintentionally reinforcing the framework of the ladder. When we describe humans as the pinnacle of evolution, we feed the very arrogance that allowed our ancestors to see others as less than human. The antidote to this poison is to constantly and consistently return to the truth of the branching tree, where there is no higher or lower, only a beautiful and chaotic diversity of form. The scientific consensus today, based on overwhelming evidence from modern population genetics, is unequivocal. Race is a social construct, not a biological reality. The visible differences we see in things like skin color, hair texture, and eye shape are biologically superficial, representing tiny, recent adaptations to local climates. Genetically, any two people from opposite sides of the world have far more in common than they have differences. There is significantly more genetic diversity within any single population, for example within the people of Vietnam, than there is between two different populations. We are all one species, one incredibly young and deeply interconnected family, who all trace our roots back to a small population of hunter-gatherers in Africa. Historians of science continue to debate the extent to which Darwin's own Victorian-era biases are reflected in his work, and how much responsibility his theory bears for the social Darwinism that followed. But what is clear is that the simple, powerful image of the ladder of progress, once it takes root in the mind, can be used to justify the worst parts of our nature. Understanding our real, tangled, and shared evolutionary story is one of the most powerful defenses we have against this ancient and recurring danger. After this long and winding journey through deep time, after exploring the vast gulf of differences that separates our world from theirs, we finally arrive back where we started, looking into the eyes of a chimpanzee. And after everything we now understand, the reflection we see is somehow even more powerful, more poignant. For millions of years, our lineages have been shaped by different pressures, our bodies and minds sculpted for different lives. Yet beneath the surface, the unbroken thread of our shared ancestry remains. And it is in our shared emotional and social lives that we feel this connection most keenly. This is the mirror of kinship. Watch a group of young chimpanzees at play. They chase, they tickle, they wrestle, they tumble, their faces contorted in a silent, open-mouthed laugh. They are learning the limits of their own strength, the rules of their society, and the joy of simple physical companionship. In their breathless, joyful chaos, you cannot help but see the echo of a human playground. Watch a mother chimpanzee with her infant. See the way she cradles it, the gentle way she strokes its back, the patience in her eyes as it explores the world from the safety of her arms. Before Jane Goodall began her revolutionary work at Gombe, the scientific world was reluctant to ascribe such complex emotions to animals. But her patient, long-term observations revealed what is now undeniable: the bonds of family, the grief over loss, and the sparks of individual personality are not unique to us. This emotional blueprint extends into their complex political lives. We see the familiar drama of ambition, the careful formation of coalitions, the sting of betrayal. We see empathy in action. After a fight within the group, the loser will often be approached by a third chimp, who will offer a comforting embrace or begin a gentle grooming session. This act of consolation, this drive to soothe the distress of another, is a behavior so deeply familiar it needs no explanation. Scientific studies have meticulously documented this pattern of reconciliation, showing how crucial it is for mending the delicate social fabric of the group. It is the primate foundation for the human virtues of compassion and peacemaking. But the mirror also has a dark side. The same capacity for in-group loyalty and cooperation that allows chimps to comfort one another also fuels their capacity for brutal, organized violence against outsiders. The chilling, silent patrols and lethal attacks on neighbors are a haunting reminder that tribalism and warfare have roots that go deeper than human history. Scientists are still in a deep debate about the extent of chimpanzee theory of mind. That is, whether they can truly understand the mental states and intentions of another individual, or if they are just incredibly skilled at reading behavior. But whether they think about their world in the same way we do, it is clear that they feel it with a similar intensity. The joy, the fear, the affection, the rage, the core emotional palette is the same. Even our biology is so similar that we are susceptible to many of the same illnesses, like the common cold. These shared traits are not a coincidence. They are our inheritance, the emotional and social software we both received from that last common ancestor, still running in our minds after 7 million years of separate development. And it is in this shared feeling that we find the most profound and undeniable proof of our kinship. So now, at the end of our long journey, we can finally return to the question that set us in motion and see it in a new light. Why aren't chimps still evolving into humans? The answer we now know is that it is the wrong question. It is loaded from the start with the false premise of the ladder, the quiet assumption that our form of being is the inevitable goal of all evolution. It is like looking at a wise and powerful wolf, perfectly adapted to the life of the pack and the hunt, and asking why it is not evolving into a bear. The wolf is not a failed bear. It is a successful wolf. Its evolutionary path is not a lesser one, but a different one, a brilliant solution to a different set of problems. And so it is with the chimpanzee. They are not our past. They are not a primitive version of us, waiting patiently in the wings of time for their chance to take our stage. They are our parallel, our contemporary, our cousin. They are an immense evolutionary success. Their lineage has survived the same planetary shifts, the same climate swings, the same relentless pressures of survival that ours has for 7 million years. Their path, which kept them in the sheltering arms of the forest, honed their bodies for power and their minds for an intimate, complex social world. Our path, which pushed us out into the open savanna, remade our skeletons for endurance and our minds for symbolic thought and large-scale cooperation. Both are victories. Both are masterpieces of survival, sculpted by the patient, indifferent hand of natural selection. There is no cosmic scoreboard that says the invention of a satellite is a greater achievement than the perfect knowledge of a forest, or that the writing of a symphony is a more successful adaptation than the intricate bonds of a family troupe. These are just two different answers to the single, ancient question that all life must answer. How do you endure? To understand this is to feel a sense of profound humility, but also a deeper and more meaningful connection. Our kinship with the chimpanzee is not the condescending relationship of an adult to a child, but the respectful and wondrous relationship of two cousins who, after a long separation, can look at each other and see the unmistakable ghost of their shared grandparent in each other's eyes. To look at a chimpanzee is to see a different way of being intelligent, a different way of being social, a different way of being successful on this planet. It is a living, breathing reminder that our path was not the only one, that our humanity is not the measure of all things, but just one beautiful and complex song in the great chorus of life. And in knowing this, we can finally appreciate them for what they truly are, not as a reflection of our past, but as a testament to the rich and branching beauty of the tree we both call home. And now, as our journey through this deep and branching story comes to a gentle close, you can let these thoughts soften and drift. Allow the images of ancient forests and sunlit plains to fade into a comfortable, quiet darkness. The immense weight of those millions of years can settle now, becoming not a burden for the mind to carry, but a soft, heavy blanket that eases you toward rest. There are no more questions to answer tonight, no more complex ideas to hold. There is only the simple, peaceful truth of this moment, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, a quiet echo of that unbroken chain of life stretching all the way back to the very beginning. You are a part of that story, a single, precious twig on that great and ancient tree, and your place here, tonight, is safe and secure. The story of what we were, and what we are, and what we might become, can be set aside for another time. For now, there is only the stillness of the room around you, and the slow, easy descent into the deep and quiet peace of your own sleep. Let the last thoughts dissolve. Let the muscles in your shoulders and your jaw release their hold, and allow yourself to float gently on that slow and silent current, down into the calm and welcoming silence of your dreams.